4 years after my son died, my husband left me for my daughter-in-law. They thought they were so clever until I played to the judge the recording of them planning my son's accident while he was still alive. If you're reading this, please subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're reading from. Let me backtrack and tell you how a 62-year-old teacher from Phoenix became the woman sitting in a courthouse with evidence that would destroy two people I once loved. It started with grief. The kind that makes you do crazy things like reorganizing your dead son's bedroom for the 1,000th time. David had been gone 4 years, but I still couldn't bring myself to pack away his things. Maybe that's why I was up in his old room that March afternoon when I heard them downstairs. My husband Tom's laugh echoed through the house, followed by Lisa's breathy giggle. My daughter-in-law had been coming by more often lately, always with little Sophie in tow, always with some excuse about needing help with something. I thought she was just lonely, still grieving David. How naive I was. She's getting suspicious. Lisa's voice drifted up the stairs, clearer now that they'd moved to the kitchen directly below David's room. I froze. David's old soccer trophy halfway to the box I'd been packing and unpacking for months. Suspicious about what? Karen doesn't suspect anything. Tom's voice was confident, dismissive. She's too wrapped up in her grief to notice what's happening right under her nose. My hands started shaking. I set the trophy down carefully, afraid the slightest sound would give me away. Whatever this conversation was, I needed to hear it. It's been over a year since we started this. Tom, when are we going to tell her? Tell me what? My heart hammered so hard I was sure they could hear it downstairs. Soon, baby. But we need to be smart about this. Karen has money and I'm going to need my half of everything when we divorce. The word divorce hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the edge of David's desk, my legs suddenly weak. Tom wanted a divorce. For Lisa. My dead son's wife. But then Lisa said something that made the blood freeze in my veins. I just wish we didn't have to wait so long after. You know, after what happened to David. There was a pause, and when Tom spoke again, his voice was softer, more careful. We agreed we'd wait 4 years. It's only been 4 years exactly. Any sooner would have looked suspicious. Suspicious. That word again. Why would their relationship look suspicious? David had died in a car accident. What did that have to do with? I know, but I still can't believe it worked. When you suggested the brake lines, I thought you were crazy. The world tilted sideways. I grabbed onto David's desk chair to keep from falling. Brake lines. They were talking about brake lines. What would you do if you discovered the two people you trusted most had betrayed you in the worst possible way? Subscribe to find out how this shocking revelation changed everything, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support means everything to me during this difficult journey. It was the perfect plan, Tom continued, and I could hear the pride in his voice. Everyone knows David was always working on that old Camaro. One little cut in just the right place and... I clapped my hand over my mouth to keep from screaming. They were talking about David's death like it was planned. Like they had planned it. Sometimes I wonder if he knew. Lisa's voice was dreamy now, almost wistful. In those last few seconds before the crash, do you think he realized what was happening? Does it matter? Tom's tone was cold, practical. He's gone. Sophie thinks her daddy died in an accident, and now we can finally be together. Everything worked out exactly like we planned. I must have made a sound then because the conversation stopped abruptly. Footsteps moved across the kitchen floor and I heard the back door open and close. Lisa was leaving, probably taking Sophie with her. I sat down heavily in David's old desk chair, staring at the walls covered with his teaching awards. My son, my beautiful, kind, dedicated son who'd loved that old Camaro more than life itself, who'd spent every weekend tinkering with it in the garage, talking to Tom about carburetors and engine compression. Tom, who knew exactly which brake line to cut. Lisa, who'd been sleeping with my husband while married to my son. Both of them, who'd murdered David and then waited 4 years to start their new life together. And me, who'd grieved for 4 years while living with his killer. That's when I realized the conversation I just heard was about to become their biggest mistake. Because what they didn't know was that I'd been recording everything in this house since the break-ins last summer. You see, after some teenagers broke into our house twice last summer, I'd had a security system installed, the kind with cameras and audio recording in every room, activated by motion and voice. The company had explained that it would capture everything for insurance purposes. Tom had complained about the cost, but he'd been traveling so much for his consulting work that I'd insisted. For my peace of mind, I told him. If only I'd known what kind of peace of mind it would actually give me. Now, sitting in David's room, I realized that every conversation between Tom and Lisa for the past 8 months was stored on that system, including the one I just heard. My hands trembled as I made my way downstairs to the control panel in the closet. The security company had shown me how to access the recordings, though I'd never needed to before. It took me 3 tries to remember the password. David's birthday. The files were all there, organized by date and room. I scrolled back to March 15th, just 20 minutes ago. Kitchen audio file. 3:47 p.m. I clicked play with shaking fingers. Their voices filled the small closet space, crystal clear and undeniably incriminating. Every word about the break lines, about waiting 4 years, about David's final moments. The truth was finally within my grasp, but I had no idea how deep this conspiracy would go. What other secrets were hiding in those recordings? Subscribe and hit the notification bell to follow this incredible journey of betrayal and justice. Let me know in the comments. Have you ever discovered something that completely changed your world? I listened to that first recording twice, tears streaming down my face. But I didn't stop there. If they'd been planning this for over a year, there had to be more. I found the first recording of them together on August 3rd, just 2 months after Tom started working late more often. Lisa's voice was excited, breathless. He suspected something, Tom. Yesterday, he asked me why I was always coming over here when he was at work. David's not stupid, Tom had replied. But he loves you. That makes him blind to what he doesn't want to see. I fast-forwarded through dozens of recordings. Love talk, planning secret meetings, discussions about David's life insurance policy worth $300,000. And then, on January 18th, I found the conversation that made my blood run cold. We can't keep this up forever, Lisa had said. What if he finds out? What if he divorces me? I'll lose everything. He won't divorce you. Tom's voice was thoughtful, calculating. David's not like that. He'd try to work it out, go to counseling, fight for his marriage. Unless what? Unless he wasn't around to fight for it. The silence stretched so long I thought the recording had stopped. Then Lisa spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? I'm suggesting that accidents happen, Lisa. Especially to people who spend a lot of time working under cars. My son. They were planning to murder my son. And they were discussing it like they were deciding what to have for dinner. I sat in that closet for 2 hours, documenting every relevant conversation. The recordings painted a picture of a year-long affair that had escalated into murder when they realized David was starting to get suspicious. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal or the murder plot. It was hearing how little they cared about the pain they were causing. In one recording from February, Lisa actually laughed while describing how she'd cried at David's funeral. I should get an Academy Award, she'd said. Tom had chuckled. You were very convincing. Even Karen hugged you and said how glad she was that David had found someone who loved him so much. I remembered that moment, standing in the cemetery, holding Lisa as she sobbed, thinking how lucky David had been to have a wife who loved him that deeply. I'd even told her she was like the daughter I'd never had. By 6 p.m., I had compiled over 3 hours of recordings spanning from August to that afternoon. Enough evidence to prove premeditated murder and conspiracy. Enough to destroy them both. But I didn't call the police. Not yet. Because first I wanted them to know that I knew. I wanted to see their faces when they realized their perfect plan was about to become their perfect downfall. 3 hours of evidence. A year of lies. A marriage built on murder. But my journey for justice was just beginning. How would you handle having this kind of devastating proof? Subscribe to find out what happened next and share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to make an impossible decision? Here's what they didn't know about me. I hadn't spent 40 years married to a consultant and 30 years as a high school teacher without learning a few things about evidence and patience. For the next 2 weeks, I became an actress worthy of Broadway. I continued my daily routine exactly as before. Morning coffee, afternoon grading, evening news with Tom. I made dinner every night, asked about his day, even helped Lisa with Sophie when she called. The only difference was that now I was recording everything intentionally, baiting them into more conversations. I'd mention how much I missed David, how I wished I knew what had really happened that night. Lisa would comfort me with her lies, and Tom would pat my shoulder while talking about accepting what we can't change. Every sympathy gesture felt like another nail in their coffins. During those 2 weeks, I also did my homework. I called my nephew Jake, who's a criminal defense attorney in Tucson. Told him I was thinking about updating my will and wanted to understand some legal concepts about evidence and recordings. "Aunt Karen," he'd said, "recording conversations in your own home is perfectly legal in Arizona as long as one party consents. And since you live there, you're always a consenting party." Perfect. I also researched the original police report from David's accident. The investigating officer had noted that the brake failure was consistent with normal wear and tear on a vehicle of that age. No further investigation had been deemed necessary. Course not. Who would suspect that a loving stepfather and grieving widow had conspired to murder their son and husband? But the most interesting thing I discovered was about the life insurance policy. Lisa had claimed it 6 months after David's death, which was normal. What wasn't normal was that she'd used part of the money to pay off debts that I'd never known David had. Debts that, according to my investigation, had been Tom's gambling debts transferred into David's name. The web of deception was even deeper than I'd thought. On March 30th, exactly 2 weeks after I'd overheard their conversation, I decided it was time to spring my trap. I invited them both over for Sunday dinner, something I'd been doing less frequently since Tom started working late so often. Lisa arrived first with Sophie, who immediately ran to hug my legs. My granddaughter was the one truly innocent person in this whole mess, and my heart broke thinking about what she was going to go through when the truth came out. "Grandma Karen, can we make cookies?" Sophie asked, her eyes bright with excitement. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, kissing the top of her head. "But first, why don't you go play in the living room while Mommy and I talk?" 2 weeks of careful planning, evidence gathering, playing the perfect victim while preparing to become the hunter. The trap was set, but would they walk into it? Subscribe to see how this dangerous game of deception played out, and let me know in the comments. Could you have kept up this act for 2 weeks? Lisa settled at the kitchen table, looking more relaxed than I'd seen her in months. "You know, Karen, I've been thinking. It might be time for Tom and me to start spending more time together openly. As friends, of course. Supporting each other through grief." The audacity of this woman. She was actually starting to lay the groundwork for their public relationship, while sitting in the house where she'd planned my son's murder. "That sounds lovely, dear," I said, putting the kettle on for tea. "Grief can be so isolating. It's good to have someone who understands what you're going through." "Exactly." Lisa's smile was bright, genuine seeming. "Tom's been such a comfort to me. Sometimes I think David would be happy knowing we're taking care of each other." I turned away so she couldn't see my expression. David would be happy. The son she'd murdered would be happy that his widow was sleeping with his stepfather. Tom arrived just as I was serving tea. He kissed my cheek like always, asked about my week like always, played with Sophie like always, the perfect picture of a grieving stepfather and grandfather. We had pot roast with all the fixings. Sophie chattered about first grade and her friend's birthday party. Lisa talked about her job at the marketing firm. Tom discussed a case he was working on. Just a normal family dinner, except that I was sitting across from my son's murderers. After Sophie went to watch cartoons in the living room, I brought out dessert, David's favorite chocolate cake. "I thought it would be nice to honor his memory," I said. Lisa's eyes filled with crocodile tears. That's so sweet, Karen. He would have loved this. Yes, I agreed, taking a bite of cake. I think he would have. Just like he would have loved knowing the truth about what happened to him. The atmosphere shifted subtly. Tom's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Lisa's smile became just a bit more strained. What do you mean? Tom asked carefully. I stood up and walked to the kitchen counter where I'd placed a small digital recorder. With deliberate slowness, I pressed play. Their own voices filled the room. When you suggested the break lines, I thought you were crazy. It was the perfect plan. One little cut in just the right place and… Lisa went white as fresh snow. Tom's face hardened into something cold and dangerous. Turn it off, he said quietly. Instead, I let it play for another 30 seconds until we reached the part about David's final moments. Then I clicked stop. 23 recordings, I said conversationally, sitting back down. Spanning almost 8 months. Every detail of your affair, your planning, and your execution of my son's murder. The moment of truth had arrived. 4 years of lies were about to crumble in one devastating revelation. How do you think they reacted when their perfect crime was exposed? Subscribe to find out what happened next in this incredible true story, and share in the comments. What would you have done in my shoes? The silence stretched between us like a live wire. You should have seen their faces. Lisa looked like she was about to vomit. And Tom? Well, Tom looked like he was calculating how quickly he could get to me and destroy that recorder. Karen, he said slowly. His voice taking on that reasonable tone he used when he was trying to convince someone of something they didn't want to believe. I think you've misunderstood what you heard. I almost laughed. Even caught red-handed. He was still trying to manipulate me. Have I? I picked up the recorder and held it like it was the most precious thing in the world, which in that moment it was. So when Lisa said, when you suggested the break lines, I thought you were crazy. She was talking about what exactly? Lisa finally found her voice. Karen, please, just listen. Oh, I have been listening, dear. For 8 months, apparently. Did you know that when you two were planning my son's murder in my kitchen, I was upstairs going through his things? Trying to decide what to keep and what to give away because my grief was so overwhelming I could barely function. The color drained from Lisa's face even more, if that was possible. You want to know the really sick part? I continued, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. I actually felt sorry for you, Lisa. I thought you were struggling with being a single mother. Babysat Sophie. I helped you with your car payments. I brought you casseroles. Karen. Tom started. I'm not finished. The steel in my voice stopped him cold. I held you while you cried at my son's funeral, Lisa. I told you that you were like the daughter I never had. I watched you comfort Sophie when she asked where Daddy went, and I thought what a wonderful mother you were, helping her through such tragedy. Lisa started crying then. But these weren't the crocodile tears from earlier. These were tears of fear. And you, I turned to Tom. You sat with me on countless nights when I couldn't sleep, when the grief was eating me alive. You held me while I cried and told me that David wouldn't want me to blame myself for not seeing the signs that something was wrong with his car. Tom's jaw tightened. You don't understand the whole situation. Don't I? I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garage where David used to work on his Camaro, where Tom had sabotaged it. What I understand is that my son started getting suspicious about his wife's frequent visits to his stepfather. What I understand is that instead of ending the affair, you two decided murder was the better option. It wasn't supposed to happen like that, Lisa whispered. I spun around. Oh, so there was a better way to murder my son. Please enlighten me. The confrontation was heating up, and their carefully constructed lies were falling apart. But they had one more desperate card to play. What would they try next? Subscribe to continue this shocking true story, and let me know in the comments. How do you think this explosive confrontation ended? We never meant for anyone to get hurt, Lisa continued, the words tumbling out. We fell in love. And David would never have understood. So you killed him. The words hung in the air like an executioner's blade. It was an accident. Lisa's voice rose to near hysteria. We just wanted him to have a little accident. Something that would put him in the hospital for a while. Give us time to figure things out. A little accident. I stared at her in disbelief. You cut his brake line, Lisa. On a mountain road. What did you think was going to happen? Tom stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This conversation is over. You can't prove anything. Smiled then. Probably the first genuine smile I'd had in 4 years. Can't I? I've already made copies, Tom. Multiple copies. And my nephew Jake. You remember Jake? The criminal defense attorney. He's reviewed everything very thoroughly. The room went dead silent except for the sound of Sophie's cartoons in the living room. What do you want? Tom's voice was flat, defeated. What do I want? I set the recorder down carefully on the table. I want my son back. I want the last 4 years of grief and guilt and agony back. I want to undo the moment I held Lisa at David's funeral and told her she was family. I paused, letting that sink in. Since I can't have any of that, I'll settle for justice. Karen, please, Lisa begged. Think about Sophie. Think about what this will do to her. That was the wrong thing to say. The absolute wrong thing to say. You should have thought about Sophie before you murdered her father. My voice could have frozen fire. You should have thought about how she would grow up without him. How she would ask questions about Daddy that you would have to lie about for the rest of her life. I picked up my phone and started dialing. Who are you calling? Tom demanded. Detective Rodriguez. I believe he handled David's case originally. I think he'll be very interested in some new evidence that's come to light. Tom lunged for my phone, but I was faster than he expected. For a 62-year-old woman, grief and rage make excellent motivators. Don't, I said, holding the phone out of his reach. Sophie is 10 feet away in the living room. Do you really want her to see her grandfather assault her grandmother? The look in his eyes told me that yes, he probably did want exactly that, but he stopped moving toward me. I finished dialing and waited for the detective to answer. When he did, I said the words I'd been rehearsing for 2 weeks. Detective Rodriguez, this is Karen Mitchell. I have new evidence regarding my son David's death. Evidence that proves he was murdered. The phone call that would change everything was made. 4 years of waiting, 2 weeks of planning. And now justice was finally within reach. But how would the police respond to this incredible evidence? Subscribe to find out what happened when law enforcement got involved. And share in the comments. Do you think I did the right thing? Detective Rodriguez arrived 30 minutes later with another officer and a technician to collect the recordings. I'd sent Sophie home with Lisa before they arrived. The child didn't need to see her mother and step-grandfather being questioned about her father's murder. Lisa had barely been able to speak as she gathered Sophie's things. Karen, please, I'm begging you. There has to be another way. There was, I'd replied. It was called not murdering my son. Tom, on the other hand, had shifted into full damage control mode. You'll never be able to prove intent, he told me as we waited for the police. Conversations can be taken out of context. A good lawyer will tear this apart. We'll see, was all I said. Now, watching Detective Rodriguez listen to the recordings with increasingly dark expressions, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 4 years. Hope. Mrs. Mitchell, he said after hearing just the first recording, I need to ask you some questions about these audio files. When were they made? Have they been altered in any way? How long have you had access to this evidence? I answered everything honestly. The recordings were made by a security system installed after break-ins. They were completely unaltered. I discovered them 2 weeks ago and had been gathering evidence since then. Why didn't you call us immediately when you found the first recording? The other officer asked. I looked him straight in the eye. Because I wanted to make sure I had enough evidence to convict them. 1 conversation could be explained away. 23 conversations detailing everything from the planning to the execution to their discussions of my son's final moments. That's harder to dismiss. Detective Rodriguez was making notes rapidly. "We're going to need to examine your security system, interview you formally, and begin the process of bringing charges. This is now a murder investigation." Murder investigation. 4 years late, but finally my son was going to get justice. Over the next week, my house became a crime scene for the second time. The first time had been when David died, with detectives asking routine questions about his state of mind and recent behavior. This time they were treating it like what it actually was: a homicide. The recordings were authenticated by forensic experts. The audio technician confirmed they hadn't been altered or tampered with. A voice recognition specialist verified that the voices belonged to Tom and Lisa. Most importantly, a mechanic examined what was left of David's Camaro, which had been stored at the impound lot all this time. Under closer scrutiny, he found evidence of deliberate tampering with the brake lines, cuts too clean and precisely placed to be the result of normal wear. "The original investigation was routine," Detective Rodriguez explained during one of our meetings. "Single vehicle accident, no witnesses, no signs of foul play. The brake failure looked consistent with a 15-year-old car that was frequently worked on. No one had any reason to suspect murder. But now you do. Now we have enough evidence to prosecute for first-degree murder and conspiracy. Your recordings establish premeditation, motive, and method. The physical evidence from the car supports the recorded confessions." The wheels of justice were finally turning, but the real drama was just beginning. How would Tom and Lisa react to being arrested? Subscribe to follow this incredible journey to its conclusion, and let me know in the comments. Have you ever had to wait years for justice? Lisa was arrested first, at her office in front of all her co-workers. I heard later that she collapsed and had to be carried out. Tom was taken from his consulting firm the same afternoon. The news hit our small Phoenix suburb like a bomb. The local paper ran the story on the front page. "Local teacher's son's death reopened as murder investigation." Within days, reporters were calling me wanting interviews about how I'd uncovered the truth. I declined them all. This wasn't about fame or attention. This was about David. But the phone calls I did take were from friends and neighbors expressing shock and support. My sister drove up from Tucson just to sit with me. My fellow teachers brought enough casseroles to feed an army. The most difficult call came from Lisa's mother, Patricia. "Karen," she said, her voice broken, "I don't know what to say. I can't believe Lisa would. I mean, I knew she was unhappy in her marriage, but I never thought." "Neither did I told her honestly. "If I had suspected anything, I would have warned David." "What's going to happen to Sophie?" she asked, and I could hear her crying. That was the question that kept me awake at night. Sophie was 6 years old. Her father was dead, murdered by her mother and step-grandfather. Her mother was facing life in prison. Her grandmother, me, was the one who had provided the evidence to convict her. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I know David would want her taken care of, protected, loved." "Lisa's going to say you're doing this for revenge," Patricia warned. "That you never liked her and you're using this to hurt her." I was quiet for a long moment. "Maybe there is some revenge in it," I said finally. "I'm not going to pretend I don't want them to pay for what they did. But mostly, Patricia, I just want the truth to come out. David deserves that much." 3 weeks after the arrests, I was sitting in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd overheard their confessions, when my lawyer called. "Karen, there's been a development. Lisa's attorney wants to meet. She's considering a plea bargain." "What kind of bargain?" "Testifying against Tom in exchange for a reduced sentence. Admitting her role, but claiming Tom manipulated her. That the murder was his idea and she was coerced into going along with it." I wasn't surprised. Lisa had always been good at playing the victim. "What does that mean for the case?" "It means we're almost guaranteed convictions for both of them. The question is whether you're comfortable with Lisa potentially serving 25 years instead of life without parole." I looked around my kitchen, at the table where David used to grade papers when he visited, at the counter where he'd made pancakes for Sophie, at the window that looked out on the garage where he'd spent so many happy hours working on that damn Camaro. 25 years. Lisa would be 50 when she got out. She would have a life after prison. David would still be dead. But Sophie would be 31 when her mother was released. She would have a chance to decide for herself whether to have a relationship with her mother again. And maybe, just maybe, that little girl deserved that chance. A plea bargain was on the table, but was it enough? The decision would affect not just Lisa and Tom, but little Sophie's entire future. Subscribe to see how this difficult choice played out and share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have chosen? Tell them I'll consider it, I said. But I want to hear exactly what she's willing to admit to first. The plea bargain meeting took place in the district attorney's office on a gray October morning, exactly 4 years to the day after David died. I'm not sure if the timing was coincidental or if someone had a sense of poetic justice. Lisa walked in wearing an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs, looking nothing like the confident marketing executive who used to sit at my kitchen table. Prison had aged her. Her hair was unwashed, her face pale and drawn. When she saw me, she started crying immediately. "Karen, I'm so sorry. I know you'll never forgive me, but I need you to know how sorry I am." I said nothing. I was there to listen, not to offer absolution. Her lawyer spread papers across the table. "Mrs. Mitchell, my client is prepared to make a full confession in exchange for a sentence of 25 years with possibility of parole. She will testify against Mr. Foster and provide details about the planning and execution of the crime." The district attorney nodded. "Lisa, I need you to tell Mrs. Mitchell exactly what you're admitting to in your own words." Lisa looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. "I had an affair with Tom starting in July. David was getting suspicious, asking questions about why I was always at your house, why I was so secretive about my phone. Tom and I talked about ending it, but we were in love." Her voice broke on the word love, and I felt bile rise in my throat. Love. She was calling the thing that killed my son love. "Continue," the DA prompted. "In January, Tom suggested that if David wasn't around, we could be together openly. At first I thought he was just talking, but then he started researching David's routines, his car maintenance schedule. He knew David always worked on the Camaro alone in the garage. What specifically did Tom propose?" Lisa closed her eyes. "He said brake lines were easy to access and cut. That if we did it right before David drove to his monthly poker game in Flagstaff, that mountain road with all the curves, it would look like an accident." I gripped the arms of my chair. They had planned it down to the specific road where my son would die. "Did you agree to this plan?" "I didn't want to," Lisa whispered. "But Tom said David would never give me a divorce, that he'd fight for custody of Sophie, that I'd lose everything. He made it sound like it was the only way." "But you did agree." "Yes." The confession continued for another hour. Every detail, every moment of planning, every lie they'd told afterward. When it was over, I had only one question. "Do you think 25 years is enough?" "Yes." Lisa's face crumpled. "Nothing will ever be enough. I know that. I know I destroyed Sophie's life, your life, my own life. I know I killed a good man who loved me and trusted me. 25 years, 50 years, life in prison. None of it will bring David back." She was right. Nothing would bring David back. But Sophie would be 31 when Lisa got out of prison. She would have a chance to decide for herself whether to have a relationship with her mother. "I'll accept the plea," I said. Tom's trial began 3 months later. With Lisa's testimony and my recordings, his conviction was swift and decisive. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the verdict was read, Tom turned to look at me one final time. I stared back without flinching. This man had killed my son, lived in my house for 4 years while I grieved, and then tried to blame everything on his co-conspirator. Justice had finally been served. 6 months later, I received a letter from Lisa in prison. She wrote about her therapy sessions, about finally understanding the magnitude of what she'd done, about wanting to be a better person for Sophie when she was eventually released. I didn't respond to that letter or any of the others that followed. But I did something else. I started the David Mitchell Foundation, dedicated to helping children who've lost parents to family violence. Sophie comes to visit me every month. Patricia brings her and we bake cookies and read books and talk about her daddy. I've told her age-appropriate versions of the truth, that some bad people hurt her daddy, and now those people are in jail where they can't hurt anyone else. Someday when she's older, Sophie will want to know more. And when that day comes, I'll tell her everything. I'll tell her that her father was a good man who loved her, who was trying to protect their family when he died. On David's birthday this year, Sophie and I released balloons in his favorite colors. As we watched them disappear into the sky, Sophie asked me if Daddy could see them from heaven. I think he can, sweetheart, I told her. And I think he knows that we made sure the bad people got punished. Good, she said with 6-year-old certainty. Daddy deserved justice. Yes, he did. And after 4 years of grief, lies, and betrayal, he finally got it. Thank you for following this incredible journey with me. If this story touched you, please subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell. Your support means everything. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to fight for justice for someone you loved? Remember, sometimes the people who hurt you most are the ones closest to you, but the truth always finds a way to surface. Until next time, stay strong and never stop fighting for what's right.